This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
I'm your host, Adam Zuckerman, and today we have a very special guest, David Buck. David is the author of The Time Optimized Life, a book that redefines time management by introducing a proactive method of time optimization. It's neat. You'll be in for a treat in just a few minutes. With over 35 years of experience in organizational and time management, David founded Kairos Management Solutions and the Infinity Lifestyle Design Program. His mission is to empower business professionals to overcome the struggles of inflexibility in life and helping them craft strategies to optimize their time and create lifestyles that are filled with meaning, purpose, and joy. Sounds a lot like we've got a good mix of missions with Buried in Work. Now, anybody who has experienced comprehensive estate planning, end-of-life tasks, or even estate administration knows that it requires significant effort. Effective time management can make a substantial difference. We're excited to dive into David's insights in time management and how these principles can simplify estate planning, end-of-life tasks, and estate administration. With that, welcome, David.
Honored to be here. Thanks, Adam. So happy to be here.
That's great. Well, let's hop right in. Let's talk about your personal journey. Can you share a little bit about your journey in business development and how it led you to specialize in time management?
Sure. So many moons ago, I started on a sales career. At that time, it wasn't business development. It was just simply sales. And I found early on that my stunning good looks and total charisma was not going to get me very far in the realm of the sales world. And so I understood that it became about relationships, and it also became about how effectively I could use my time, but also help my clients use their time better as well. And that became something that was foundational to me, that I knew that I was not going to get beat because someone else over-prepared. And that became my deal. That's how I trained both teams and individuals that I worked with throughout the course of my career. And really, after about 35 plus years, I was like, I'm finding that there's a lot of people out there that understand this concept of time management, but don't use it well. And that's when I dove into doing Kairos Management Solutions, and really to help individuals and businesses map their time. But then around that time, my wife and I were having a semi-annual review with our financial advisors. And unbeknownst to me, she said, "Hey, what if Dave retired tomorrow?" And they gave us the thumbs up. They said it could be a little bit of rice and beans for a while, but you could do it. And that struck me as like, I hadn't even prepared for that. Like, what would I do if the job left today, if all the work that I did? So that led me on a personal journey to take the concepts I work with clients to say, well, how does that apply to somebody who then doesn't have a job, who decides to retire? And that led me to found the Infinity Lifestyle Design Program. And that's the post-career side. That's where I help people there.
So you retired to start a new company immediately after. Now, within that framework, we talk about time management, we talk about time optimization. What's the relationship and the difference between the two?
So that's a really good question. I always have felt, as I've worked with clients, people are very reactive to their use of time. We all consume time at the same rate. Doesn't matter, a second's the same for you, for me, and for anyone who's listening. But how we use that time is different and unique for all of us. And I found people, when they applied the concept of time management, they were usually just saying, oops, something's coming at me. I got to address that. And I wanted to flip the script in that sense to tell people, stop managing. We all have to react to certain situations. But when you pivot more to being proactive and looking at and trying to anticipate what's coming your way, the more you're going to optimize your time, and the more you're going to be able to protect that time when people come calling, wanting to use your time for their benefit.
So time management is reactive and time optimization is proactive. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's dive into that. What are some of the tips and the tricks that people can take away from this conversation, from your learnings of how we can actually manage our time a little bit better?
I find that there are three elements related to where people struggle most with their time in the research that I've done and as I've worked with clients. The three areas are: first, people are distracted, and we live in a distraction world. And number two, people have a tendency to procrastinate. And I'll define that in a second. And then thirdly, people lack the essence of any type of calendar structuring. And so they live without those three. That's where they become very reactive.
Mhm.
And so distractions first, that is, I define that as something that's internally, you're allowing yourself internally to lose focus. And typically the biggest culprit there is our smartphones. That causes us to be distracted, or any screen, so to speak. And that is typically people's number one challenge in managing their time. And then procrastination is intentionally delaying on something that you know is going to cause you harm. And that's typically comes about because people haven't defined an activity, project, or item that they need to do with enough specificity. And then finally, on the calendaring, people don't use the calendars to the full potential that it does. We all have one. If we have an email exchange server, you got a calendar with that. But I find many people are reactive there. They don't plan it. They just fill the calendar with it. And so those are the three areas that I would suggest people look at first.
Okay, so let's start with step one. What are the takeaways?
So step one on the takeaways related to, let's say, distractions is people need to say to themselves, what can I do in the environment around me to not lose focus? If that means I've got to quarantine my phone, if it means I got to shut down notifications that are all in around me, I'm going to do that. But I'm going to myself take the initiative to try to minimize whatever things that are going to come at me in that way. When it comes to procrastination, first step is, have I defined more in detail what it means to accomplish that said task or opportunity? Because it usually means you're going to have to break it up into a variety of different smaller steps to complete the whole. And then the third thing is, I encourage my clients, plan your calendar out 2 weeks in advance. And I call it wet cement, in that you build the foundation, but you know you're going to have to adjust it. That puts you in a position in all three of those to negotiate yourself better when people, again, come calling for your time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have your calendar, you're planning 2 weeks out in advance. It has to remain flexible, I imagine, but how detailed are we actually getting? Are you saying you had 15 minutes for breakfast? After breakfast, I'm going to have 10 minutes on the calendar for washing dishes. It's almost like you're creating tasks to create tasks. Where do you find that balance, and how detailed and granular are you suggesting people actually go?
Well, first of all, I tell just start. So it's a creep, crawl, walk, run method. Don't sit there if you're not using your calendar effectively today. And like you said, I'm gonna do 10 minutes for doing dishes. Typically, what I do is lay out blocks of time unless it's fully defined. So, for example, I'm writing my second book this afternoon. I've got 2 hours carved out on my calendar for that. However, it's not fully blocked. So if for some reason a client needs me, my calendar is going to show open, even though I've blocked that time off. Now, if I wanted to and say, I don't want anyone bothering me, then I make sure that I make that appointment busy so that no one can come in and do that. So I think it's a level of bucketing your time with a general activity that you want to do. So maybe it could be personal time in the morning, an hour of personal time. You decide what you want to do in that personal time, but you're at least putting it out there and you're saying to yourself, I'm going to devote time to myself in this, whatever that is.
When we talk about comprehensive estate planning, and we've talked about this numerous times on the podcast and in conversations with clients and individuals that come to the website, they oftentimes get overwhelmed. So I don't know where to start. I think that it's just a will or a trust. What else do I need to know? And because of that, it's that procrastination feature of, it's complicated, I'll just do it later. What steps, or what are your thoughts on prioritizing difficult tasks? Is it something that you start in the beginning of the day? Does time of day even matter? But to get people in the mindset where they can actually tackle something like estate planning, like getting their end of life tasks or their advanced directives in order. They want to focus on it. What's that process look like?
So specifically to estate planning and end of life planning, I can't emphasize enough that you need help. I in our case with my wife and I don't know how we could have done something like that ourselves because of all the nuances there. So I think the first thing an individual, whatever the task is or project that they're going to do, can I do this myself? And if you can't, it's okay because there are experts. We're not all subject matter experts in everything. And so we need to rely on that. So I think first of all is, do I need outside help or an accountability partner, whatever you want to define that, as someone who's going to come alongside you and hold you accountable, not affirm everything you're doing, but come alongside to make sure you get that right. So I can't emphasize that piece enough. And then I think the other avenue is break it down. So the idea of estate planning, that can be, I don't even know what that means. So estate planning could be, first thing I want to do is, how do I do a will? Well, a will could be complex enough itself. So it's simply say, let me just jot down all the things that I think are important to me related to my desires for either my assets or or my own quality of life. If someone has to take care of me, just scribble all that down. You've made progress. Then at some point you say, I'm going to take all my notes. I'm going to turn it over to an expert or my accountability partner to help me organize this.
That's exactly what the process is at Buried in Work. Is the estate preparation package or our checklist helps people organize all their information. So when they go to an estate planning attorney, they have everything in one place. And the estate planning attorney then can serve them more effectively, faster, and oftentimes it's even more cost effective and saves some money on the back end. I'm interested in this accountability partner. It could be a service provider, I imagine, like an attorney, a CFA, someone else. Can an accountability partner be a spouse, a loved one, anybody you choose?
Yes. And I think it depends on what it is you feel you need some assistance with. Obviously, on a professional standpoint, if you're going to do something like estate planning or financial advising, I, again, highly encourage people to seek out that right professional there. But let's say, for example, you've got an important situation at work where you've got to develop and deliver on a project, whether it's to your boss, to the owner, whoever of a company. I think at that point, then you pull in a coworker, a trusted partner on a professional sense that says, hey, I really could use your help. I've got to deliver these key 5 things, whatever it is, in this particular due date. Can we meet periodically for you to gauge and challenge me on how I'm progressing? And you can do the same thing on a personal standpoint. So for example, one of my personal goals is I want to hike the Grand Canyon rim to rim. Well, my oldest son is my accountability partner. He's like, okay, where are you at on your training day? He actually tested me last week. He took me on a hike and he said, okay, I think you're at least well enough, Dad, because if you were huffing and puffing and couldn't do it after this hill, I was going to tell you to rethink your goal. So it can happen on the professional or personal side of life.
How does multitasking play in? I mean, we've all sat on the couch now watching TV while we're also endlessly scrolling on our phones and having our conversation with somebody that's watching the TV with us. We've been at our desk and emails open while you're writing a report and bing, 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 bing. Emails come in and you constantly bounce back. Is multitasking okay? Is multitasking something we need to move away from? What do you think?
I am not a fan of multitasking. In the research that I have done, I found that the vast majority of the studies that have been done that says our brain can really only focus on one thing at a time. And so instead of what I call multitasking, I ask clients to think about it as microtasking. So for example, we can have 3 browsers open, our email, our phones going off, but just know you can't do 2 things at one time effectively. So own the fact that if you've got a variety of things open, when you switch to that email, give it 100% of your full attention, make a decision, get it done, and then switch back to the browser if you're looking at something. Now, I do feel that we can do some elements of multitasking on lower priority items. So for example, I will fold laundry while I'm listening to a podcast. because both are low impact. And I do find myself either, I got to stop folding laundry and go back to what the host said there, because that's real important. But bottom line, if it's a high level priority, give it your all to that one task.
Okay. It's important to metricize and to track the impact of changes in someone's life. For example, I wouldn't want to dedicate time to setting up a new calendar if I don't have one, to optimizing. I'm going to block off this and then have people use a calendar program if that's the route I want to go to grab time on my calendar, unless I knew it was actually working. Are there any steps that people can take to understand how this process of time optimization is actually impacting for the good, or possibly maybe it's not working for them? How can you track that?
So one of the great things about challenges and opportunities related to how people manage their time is many of them are interrelated. So for example, if you're a person who's highly distracted, you're going to find I'm probably not as prepared for meetings as I should be. I'm probably running late to appointments. So I encourage people to say, and I have a free assessment that people can take that identifies their biggest opportunities. So if someone says, wow, I know distractions are huge for me, when you work on that and you do, a rising tide lifts all boats. And you're going to find you're probably not as late to meetings as much as you were. You're a little bit more focused when people are in front of you. You might find you're getting your assignments done quicker or on time because you've eliminated one major area that helps others.
And we'll add a link to that free assessment in the episode notes for everybody to easily find. How about people in different phases of their life? If you are starting your career, you are hitting your stride in your career, or maybe you've retired, does the approach modify and change based on where you are, or is it the same for everyone?
No, it's definitely changes. So you think of someone who goes fresh out of college and into work. Let's say they jump into a 48-hour work week job. They now have over 40% of their awake time filled. That probably is a lot more structured than it was if they were, say, a student. That also falls into the backside. So when retirement comes, someone leaves a career, they have to figure out what to do with 40% of their awake time. Again, if they're working a 48-hour-a-week job. And many people, so it's easy for a person going into career because it's structured, but then they struggle with how do I be efficient? Because all of this stimulus is coming at them that may be different. And then in the end, for those who are headed into retirement, it's the opposite. What do I do when all of this structure goes away? How do I fill that with valuable time that helps me bring meaning and joy to my life?
How about advice for the overwhelmed? It takes 570 hours on average to administer an estate. That's a lot of time that I don't think many people have just laying around. If the listeners are overwhelmed right now by their time management, if estate planning and even starting or going back and editing is overwhelming them, what advice do you have for them to actually start and reframe their point of mind?
That you take the overall arching term of estate planning and you break it down into viable chunks that you know you can work on individually. I also say to people is in the case of estate planning, you may want to give yourself a time frame that you want. I want my estate to be done by X, but don't jump into that right away until you understand what it's going to take to get there. And if it takes you 6 months, so for example, my wife and my sister did an estate plan for my mother-in-law, their mom. It took them 9 months to get everything completed. And they all started thinking, we're going to get this done. And the estate attorney's like, hang on a second, calm down, be ready. This is a journey. And when she continued to coach them through that, okay, we've got one step down. Congratulations. Well done. Now the next step. I think everyone needs to just say, particularly with estate planning or anything big like that, is don't establish a time frame yet until you know all the mechanics behind that. Once you do that, then great, own the gates, but be patient, because you may find, well, I thought it would just take a week to establish a will. Why are we doing this still a month later? Because it could be a lot more complex than what you thought.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And what many people don't realize is that when you start drafting your estate plan, you have those foundational documents, and they're designed for today in case something happens tomorrow, but you have to revisit them over time because they have to evolve with your changing landscape as well. And where you are today in your life is going to be very different from where you are in 10, 20, 30 years. And then you're right, it can also spiral. So you start with those foundational documents, and then you find out, oh, I need guardianship provisions, or, oh, I need advanced directives, or now I want to do legacy messaging. There's a lot of different things that come into play. And I think that remaining flexible is unbelievably important.
And if I might add, sorry, Adam, the emotional component of this is so often overlooked, because you might say clinically, I've got 30 steps to get my estate done. But what, particularly with my mother-in-law, it was emotionally tough for her to give that control up. And so they had to pause a couple times to then reflect with her, walk her through, to say, no, you still have control. No, we're not. We're not going to budget you X amount per week. This is for us to be able to help you in case you're unable to make those decisions. And so it's an emotional roller coaster. And I find people headed into retirement go through that as well. It's kind of like, wow, how do I handle this fact that I'm no longer, quote, important because I don't have a job?
And that's absolutely right. And maintaining that delicate balance of having purpose and dignity while also helping someone can throw a wrench and complication into the entire process. But the sooner you can start that process and have those conversations, the better it is for everyone. You've started the company, you have your online free assessment, you have the book. Let's talk about that. If people want to learn more about the resources that you offer so they can implement your strategies and proven methodologies into their journey, where do they go? What do they need to know?
So I would just say any listener, go to infinitylifestyledesign.com. Again, infinitylifestyledesign.com, one word. And once you get there, it'll take you to, if you want to buy the book, there's the link for that. There's also the assessments that I do, one on the what I call in career, and then the one for somebody who's heading retirement post-career, all based upon the semblance of trying to get you to understand how you can best allocate your time for the time of your life that you're in. And then from that, they can learn about how they can work with me if they choose to do this. But either way, I just encourage you, go take one or both of the assessments so you get a summary view of where you're at, and decide how you can best consume and use your time proactively.
All right. And the last question that we ask all of our listeners is, or guests rather, for the listeners, is if we could talk about one more thing that we didn't talk about that you think is unbelievably important, what is that? What do we miss today?
Patience. Whatever you plan and whatever you do, if it's important to you, add 20 to 50% more time on top of it, because it always takes longer than expected. I ask anyone to reflect, because I can do that for me. The really, really good stuff that has happened to me, or meaningful stuff has happened to me in my life, usually was a result of it taking a longer time than I expected.
All right, David, thank you so much for your time. We enjoyed the conversation. And that wraps up another Buried in Work podcast episode, where we feature tips and stories from industry professionals who specialize in making estate planning, end-of-life tasks, and estate transitions more manageable. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving a review, following us on social media, or visiting us at the website, buriedinwork.com. And don't forget, podcast listeners can save 10% off Buried in Work's estate preparation package and games with code BIWPodcast. David, thanks again. It's been a pleasure.
Adam, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at buriedinwork.com.